This is Sarah, and I'm still working on the Shibon project. I started the first new augment of this year, and it has to do with the neck, particularly matters of suction regarding the neck. And I'm calling this device the suck choker, which is pretty literal. That's exactly what it do, so it doesn't leave a whole lot to the imagination. So I think it's important to mention at this point that pretty much all of these devices started with a discussion about some physical sensation. So what I mean by this is me and a bunch of my friends would get together and we would talk about something like asphyxiation or squeezing or pulling or sucking or licking. And after we came to some deeper understanding about the psychological reason why these things are perceived as pleasurable by us humans, I would start brainstorming a way to deconstruct that sensation so that I might replicate it mechanically. In the case of the suck choker, it was a discussion about suction. And when you think of matters of the neck and suction, you immediately think of the hickey.
A hickey, or love bite, in British English, is a bruise or bruise-like mark caused by the kissing or sucking of the skin, usually on the neck or arm. While biting might be part of giving a hickey, sucking is sufficient to burst small superficial blood vessels under the skin.
For this augment, it was not my goal to give myself a bunch of hickeys. I wanted to create a choker that replicated just the sucking sensation. In order to pull this off, I had to address two things. That was the surface that was making contact with the skin and the thing doing the suction. But I'm going to talk about the thing making contact with the skin first. I had to decide how to create an artificial sucker that kind of felt like lips. Now, if we're talking about matters of squeezing and sucking, I can think of an animal that does both of these things quite well. And that is, of course, the octopus. I did take a lot of inspiration from the cephalopod, particularly their tentacles and how they're equipped with many suction devices. In order to get that soft, squishy lip feeling, though, I knew I was going to have to do some silicone molding, which I really wasn't looking forward to because I hate sticky things, and uncured silicone is incredibly sticky. But I bit the bullet and I invested in some EcoFlex 10, which is very soft, stretchy, skin-like silicone. So I ended up creating a 4-part mold. There are 2 pieces on the side that come together. There's a plug that goes in through the bottom, and then a piece that drops into the top like that, and you pour the silicone in through these little gaps. I don't have a vacuum chamber, so I had to kind of pray that no giant air bubbles got lodged in some hard-to-reach space. And it took many tries, but I eventually got a multitude of suction cups that fit my specific sucking needs. So I found that the way to make the perfect suction cup was to actually mold a tube that was twice as long as it needed to be, kind of like this, and then fold it in half in on itself, like this. Because then you would get this really nice round lip. I knew that I was going to be holding many of these kind of on a string of pearls along my neck, and I was going to have to load up some sort of lattice that would hold them in place. So another thing that I had to do was mark on my neck spots that I knew felt good to be sucked on. Keeping those in mind, I had to create a structure that would hold these in the correct position. So I went through several different variations of lattice before I got one that looked right and held everything in place where it ought to go. And then also kind of made sure that these kept a firm contact on the surface of my skin. Once I figured out the logistics of the thing making contact with my skin, I had to address matters of creating suction. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I knew that I didn't want to actually give myself a hickey, so vacuum pumps are out of the question. I stuck with something a lot more analog, the syringe. So I ordered a bunch of these tiny little, I guess, craft syringes. I played around with them. I took one of my best suckers, I attached some silicone tubing to one end of the sucker, the other to the syringe, and I placed the sucker on my skin and I actuated this thing a bunch of times. And if I did this motion repeatedly, it would leave a little pink ring after I pulled the sucker off of my forearm. It disappeared in a couple of seconds, but I knew it was working. So once I saw that it did work and it did create that sucking kind of kissing sensation, I decided on how to drive them. It took me about a week, but I came up with a compact rack and pinion assembly that mechanically drove the plunger of the syringe in and out. The individual assemblies did kind of end up looking like blades or feathers or something. And since I knew I wasn't going to be mounting those assemblies on the necklace, I kind of figured it made sense to locate them on my back. Because if you think about it, feathers, back, I could make wings out of this thing. So I decided to split my total number of syringes into 2 separate banks. So they kind of fan out at an angle on one shoulder blade and then the same angle on the other. So the only thing left to do was figure out how I was going to wear this back rack on my body. So I created some shoulder hooks that allowed me to wear the device like a backpack. So what's controlling all of this stuff? Each of the Shibon augments has its own dedicated brain. That's just sort of how it's gone so far. I did the same thing for this augment and went ahead and created a circuit board that would be responsible for driving each of the servo motors. I decided to name this circuit board the Taco, but that's T-A-K-O, like the Japanese word for octopus. It consequently kind of looks like a normal taco, like a crunchy taco. And there are 8 connectors on the top that go to each of the suckers and 8 connectors on the bottom that go to each of the motors driving the syringes. Now, the reason why there are connectors going to the suckers is that this is really nice, like light diffuser material. So I made a tiny round board called the calamari, each equipped with 8 RGB LEDs that would be embedded inside of these suckers. And the nice thing about creating this thing so that it folds in half is that there's kind of this like foreskin around the edge that I could kind of pull up and over the circuit board so that it was kind of swallowed by the sucker. So that not only held it in place, but it made sure that the light looked like it was coming from the inside of the sucker instead of just behind it. Yeah, that's right. Foreskin. So once I had my suckers created and my syringe bank of suck power completed as well, I combined the two with some silicone tubing, which I had to sort of fit to make sure that it had the proper sort of arc aesthetic going from my back to my neck, and I powered it up. Okay. I guess the thing everybody wants to know is how this thing actually feels on my body. And the truth is, it functions exactly the way that I thought it would. Like, it makes the sucking sensation on my neck right now kind of intermittently, and I can't anticipate where I'm gonna get nibbled on next. And the lights are corresponding with the sucker giving the suction. So this is my method of indication right here. The Shibon augments have 2 components to them. There's the sensing of arousal from my body, and then there's the indication of arousal to everybody else. Now, the thing that I'm going to key in on is my, I guess what I'm sensing from my body is my respiratory rate. And that is to say, how quickly I'm actually breathing in and out. The way that's going to affect this augment, this device, is when I breathe in, when I take in a breath of air, the suckers will suck, and when I let that breath of air out, the suckers will release. As I breathe faster and faster, you'll be able to see this thing just sort of cranking at my neck, and you'll be very aware of the feedback loop that it's creating in me. of me. I think one of the only questions left to ask at this point is whether or not the sensation of having your neck sucked on is still pleasurable when the human component has been subtracted out of it. Knowing that a machine is doing this to me, is it still exciting? And I think that's a question I'm only going to be able to answer after some time alone on the couch with a beer, wearing this. So without further ado, I'm gonna take off. As always, keep making awesome stuff out there, and thank you for watching. I'm really curious if this thing is going to leave marks on my neck.